particular area beyond the Millennium Development Goals and throughout all of your concerns, population, fertility, I mean, it just goes on and on, the amazing number of areas, including its International Youth Day and many, many others, where it engages young people beyond the Model UN and Cyber School Bus that you may know well.
Over to Tinek for two questions from there.
I was just going to ask to what extent your involvement and efforts have impact on UN policies towards youth, and also its impact on the local governments in terms of changing their policies and improving the youth condition in their respective countries.
Let's take the second question also.
My question is, what other countries are taking such an active role in recruiting youth? Who are your greatest collaborators? Who needs to take greater strides? And what are the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in the formation of the Youth Assembly?
You know, I'd almost like to reverse the first question. I don't know that we can quickly affect U.S. policy, UN policy, but I do find that UN policy is changing and affecting our access to the United Nations. A number of years ago, I think that people would look at you as if you had two heads when you said, let's bring youth in. They didn't particularly respect youth as a category and looked to their own initiatives, the adults and the older adults here, as ways to resolve our problems without involving youth. Now the UN, especially at the end of the previous Secretary General's tenure here and the beginning of the new Secretary General, there has been a real move to include young people and youth program into its own structure. So when we brought the Youth Assembly at first to the United Nations, we were told we couldn't do it. We simply could not do this because it didn't emanate from the United Nations. Therefore, there was no place to fit us in. So what we did was we went to the permanent missions, and by getting the permanent missions approval first and foremost, indeed this is their house. It is the permanent missions of the United Nations who live here, and the Secretariat, which is ECOSOC and DESA and DPI and all of the rest, UNDP, et cetera, that work here, well, they followed suit. So once the nations approved of our work, we were allowed in. After 5 or 6 years of proving ourselves, now going into the 7th year, this attitude at the United Nations began to change about involving youth, and they came to us anew and said, all right, how can we work together? We realize that you're going to be here whether we work together or not, so how can we find a way to work together? I think of our own President Obama here in the United States, who has said when he spoke recently abroad that the U.S. is like a very large ship and it's very difficult to have it just turn right or left. If you've ever been on a large cruise ship and they have to turn, it takes a very long time to turn a very large boat. And the United States is one, I would say certainly the United Nations is another, very large organization that it will take a long time for it to effectively turn, but it is turning, and it is turning to youth. And as Ambassador Kamal said, it's turning to youth for very obvious reasons. Maybe it doesn't even want to, but it's turning because so many people on the planet are under 25 now, large proportionate amounts of governments around the world are noticing this. So you ask about local governments. We are finding that throughout the world there are governments that really respect their young people, and more are allowing those young people to have a say that is open-ended. There may be very controlled situations like China, but there are also very open situations in other areas of the world, in Central and Eastern Europe, in Latin America, in places in Africa and in Asia. We are finding more local rather than national governments being very supportive of our work and involving many young people to come here, even from places like Georgia in Eastern Europe, like Nigeria, area, places that you wouldn't normally expect. And I believe this is the TNEC campus. We will be on your campus, and we will be working with some international students who are going to be part of our program there, and hospitality and tourism students. We'll be bringing almost 600 young people from around the world your age here, and many of your hospitality and tourism students have become interested in interning with us so that they could be a part of this project. And in terms of those active roles, the most active countries, as you've asked, have been in the recent past China, Latin America. I would say at least 3 or 4 countries have been very active with us. Indonesia sent 17 young dancers for the past 2 years, and those dancers have been working on social issues. It's really across the board. We have 52, 55 countries represented each year over the last 3 years. We've brought in about 1,000 students each year. We have about 1,200 who register and about 1,000 who we accept. And this year we're only accepting 550, but that has to do with the capital master plan here and the renovations, which have closed down some of the larger areas for us to use.
I'd like to add a supplementary with reference to the question about UN policy. I think it is fair for everybody to know that the United Nations is going through a sort of a crisis, a midlife crisis. It is 64 years old. It was established on the basis of a particular consensus in 1944-45. The consensus was easy because we had just come out of a terrible event, which was World War II. And so it was easy to draft consensus. But that consensus has worn out of steam now because the United Nations continues to be fundamentally non-democratic as an organization. An overwhelming amount of power is exercised in the United Nations by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, namely United States, Britain, France, Russia, and China. And the democratic structure of the UN has grown 4 times in its life. It started with just 50 members. It's now almost 200 members. And so you have to begin to make it more democratic. Among that democratic requirement is a greater turn towards youth, because at the moment it is the developing countries and the youth in the world which is the majority, and therefore it has to be given greater priority than is being given at the moment. But this is the whole question of United Nations reform, which is not easy because the privileges enjoyed by a few are so great that they have no desire to give up those privileges in the interest of democracy. Over to Florum for questions from that end. I think we will have time for one supplementary question from Knee-High Vancouver and TNEC before we end our session today. Over to Florum.
Hello, Ambassador Kamal. I have a question. What are the best strategies for the United Nations to integrate more youth into its secretariat structure?
I didn't get one word. Where are the best what?
Strategies.
Strategies. Very simple. Kick out all the people who are over 30 and employ those who are under 30. I mean, when I say that the average age is 50, you understand what that means. It means that there must be people well above 50 also. Only 5% are below 35. That means almost everybody has a long white beard in the United Nations Secretariat. It's just not fair. And so you have to slowly rejuvenate by bringing in more and more younger people and by giving facilities to young people to occupy positions of responsibility. And there have been some young people who have done brilliant work in the UN Secretariat. But the older people have a vested interest